The Anakin Skywalker most people think they understand is driven by anger, ambition, and rage. Yet the story consistently presents something far quieter and far more corrosive beneath the surface. His emotional engine is not fury, but shame rooted in failure that he cannot metabolize. Anger becomes the outward expression because shame is too intimate to survive exposure. Every violent outburst is a defensive maneuver designed to keep memory at bay. The dark side does not ignite him, it insulates him from himself. Anakin Skywalker does not fall because he enjoys cruelty, but because he cannot endure the weight of what he has done. His choices on Mustafar fracture his identity so completely that reconciliation becomes psychologically impossible. To acknowledge regret would require confronting the fact that his sacrifices were not only wrong, but unnecessary. Shame demands distance, not healing. The dark side offers that distance by converting pain into performance. This is why rage never resolves anything for him, because rage is not the wound. It is the bandage he applies repeatedly until the injury festers underneath. Each act of violence temporarily confirms the lie that he is beyond redemption. That confirmation is comforting because it removes responsibility for repair. If he is irredeemable, then he no longer has to reckon with the possibility that he chose wrong when other choices were available. Rage keeps the question closed. Anakin does not want forgiveness because forgiveness would force him to confront the enormity of what he destroyed. He wants judgment because judgment aligns with the narrative he has built to survive. To be condemned is to be validated in his self-loathing. Mercy would require vulnerability, and vulnerability would reopen the wound he has sealed inside armor. In this way, his cruelty toward others is an extension of his cruelty toward himself. Darth Vader is therefore not a transformation into something new, but a containment strategy for something broken. The persona exists to sustain the belief that Anakin Skywalker no longer exists. Vader is not an empowered identity, but a constructed verdict. Every breath reminds him that survival itself is punishment. The dark side keeps him alive, specifically, so that he must live with what he has done. The mask is often discussed as physical protection, but its primary function is emotional armor. It removes his face from the world, and with it the possibility of recognition. Without a visible expression, there can be no reflection, no empathy, and no invitation to remember who he was. The mask ensures that interactions remain transactional rather than relational. It creates distance where closeness would be unbearable. Inside that armor, Anakin is frozen in the moment of his greatest failure. Time moves forward around him, but internally he remains on the banks of lava, replaying the same decision endlessly. Every confrontation is coloured by Mustafar because it is the last moment, where another outcome still felt possible. He does not grow, he calcifies. The galaxy changes, but his internal landscape does not. This is why power functions as punishment rather than reward. The dark side gives him strength, but demands constant reaffirmation of self-hatred to maintain it. He must continue to commit violence to justify his existence as Vader. Peace would invite reflection, and reflection would invite collapse. Power keeps him busy, not fulfilled. It is a sentence rather than an escape. His obedience to the Emperor follows the same logic. Submission confirms the narrative that he deserves domination. Autonomy would require self-trust, and self-trust died on Mustafar. Vader serves because service removes choice. Choice would reintroduce responsibility, and responsibility would reopen guilt. In obedience, he finds relief from agency. This dynamic reframes every act of brutality as performative rather than expressive. Vader is not venting anger, he is staging inevitability. Each display of terror reinforces the identity he believes he must inhabit. The monster is not discovered, it is maintained. Fear becomes proof that there is no path back. Cruelty becomes evidence that redemption is impossible. The tragedy is that this performance convinces others long before it convinces him. The galaxy sees Vader as an embodiment of evil, while Anakin sees him as proof of self-condemnation. This disconnect allows the system to use him efficiently. He is feared externally and hollow internally. The Empire exploits both conditions simultaneously. Nowhere is this more apparent than in his relationship with Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is not defined by betrayal alone, but by mirrored guilt. Each man believes he failed the other in an unforgivable way. Their bond becomes a closed circuit of shame, feeding shame. Neither knows how to offer absolution without collapsing under it. Their separation preserves their survival at the cost of healing. Obi-Wan Kenobi represents the last witness to Anakin's humanity, and therefore the greatest threat to Vader's constructed identity. To be seen by Obi-Wan is to be remembered, and to be remembered is to suffer. Anakin needs Obi-Wan to condemn him, because condemnation allows him to remain frozen. Mercy would force movement, and movement feels impossible. Their conflict is less about ideology and more about emotional exposure. This is why every reunion is charged with unbearable tension rather than simple hatred. Vader does not seek to defeat Obi-Wan, he seeks to confirm his own narrative through him. If Obi-Wan believes he is lost, then he can remain lost safely. If Obi-Wan believes he can be saved, then the lie collapses. Judgment protects him from hope. The show Obi-Wan Kenobi makes this explicit by centering suffering rather than spectacle. Vader's presence is not triumphant, it is agonizing. His power is immense yet purposeless. Every victory feels empty because it does not resolve the core wound. The series insists that Anakin never stops suffering. He simply learned how to weaponize that suffering outward. This understanding recontextualizes the entire original trilogy by revealing that Vader's obsession with Luke is not about legacy, but about unbearable proximity to an unlived life. Luke represents the version of Anakin who chose differently and survived intact. That possibility is intolerable because it proves that the damage was not inevitable. Luke is not just his son, he is his alternative self. The dark side did not erase his pain, it preserved it indefinitely. Every breath is penance, and every act of power reinforces the sentence. Vader is not fueled by hate, he is sustained by shame. And that shame is the quiet engine driving the entire saga. Once this internal architecture is understood, the cruelty of Darth Vader across the original trilogy takes on a different and far more unsettling meaning. His violence is not the release of anger, but the maintenance of an identity he believes is mandatory. Every act of terror is rehearsed, not impulsive. He enforces fear because fear confirms distance, and distance keeps memory contained. Cruelty becomes proof that there is no version of himself worth saving. The monster must be convincing, or the sentence collapses. This is why his presence is so theatrical and deliberate rather than chaotic. Vader enters rooms slowly, speaks sparingly, and punishes decisively because performance reinforces inevitability. The spectacle is not for others, alone it is for himself. Each display reminds him that he has crossed too far to return. The more convincing the monster, the safer he feels from remorse. Terror becomes armor layered on top of the suit. Darth Vader does not escalate violence to satisfy desire, but to avoid introspection. Silence is dangerous because it invites memory. Stillness recalls Mustafar, and Mustafar recalls choice. Action keeps the past suppressed. In this way, the Empire becomes his accomplice, by providing endless motion, endless enemies, and endless justification. The war never ends because an ending would require reflection. This reframing explains why Luke Skywalker disrupts Vader more profoundly than any military threat. Luke is not simply opposition, he is evidence. He embodies the future Anakin believes he disqualified himself from inhabiting. Luke's existence proves that love did not need to end in possession, and that fear was not destiny. Every encounter forces Vader to confront the unbearable truth that another path existed. Luke is not temptation. He is indictment. Luke Skywalker does not attack Vader's power, he attacks his narrative simply by refusing to hate him. Luke's insistence on seeing Anakin destabilizes the identity Vader depends on. Compassion is not comforting. It is excruciating because it removes the justification for self-loathing. Luke does not offer absolution. Casually, he offers recognition. That recognition reopens the wound Vader has spent decades sealing. This is why Vader's obsession with Luke intensifies rather than resolves. He oscillates between destroying Luke and possessing him because both options preserve the lie. Killing Luke would erase the evidence. Turning Luke would validate the narrative that corruption is inevitable. What Vader cannot tolerate is Luke remaining whole while rejecting darkness. That outcome leaves nowhere to hide. Redemption in this context is not resisted because it is weak, but because it is agonizing. To accept the light would mean acknowledging that the suffering he inflicted was not required. It would mean accepting responsibility without the anesthetic of inevitability. Redemption would not erase pain, it would demand ownership of it. For Anakin, this is the most frightening possibility imaginable. Darkness hurts less because it numbs. The saga therefore positions redemption as an act of emotional violence against the self rather than a relief. It requires the destruction of a carefully maintained psychological structure. Vader must allow the identity he built to die before he can reclaim the one he buried. This is why redemption only occurs when death is already certain. Survival would require living with what comes after. Death offers finality and mercy simultaneously. Obi-Wan Kenobi's role in this arc becomes clearer through this lens because his guilt mirrors Anakin's in form, if not in scale. Both men are frozen by failure. Both believe they are responsible for what followed. Both avoid healing by clinging to penance. Obi-Wan isolates himself just as Vader encases himself. Their divergence is not moral, but expressive. One turns inward, the other outward. Obi-Wan Kenobi cannot forgive Anakin because forgiveness would require forgiving himself. Their bond remains locked in the moment of failure because moving forward would collapse the identities they have constructed to survive. This is why their confrontations are emotionally catastrophic rather than cathartic. They do not resolve anything because resolution threatens stability. Pain becomes familiar, and familiarity becomes refuge. The series Obi-Wan Kenobi makes this explicit by refusing to present Vader as triumphant. His power is immense yet purposeless. He dominates physically, but remains emotionally inert. Every victory rings hollow because it does not move him forward. The show frames his suffering as continuous, not episodic. Anakin never stops paying, he simply never stops living. This continuity of suffering reframes the entire saga as a study in what happens when trauma is never metabolized. The Force amplifies emotional states but does not resolve them. Power without healing becomes recursion. Vader's life is a loop designed to avoid the very reckoning that could end it. The galaxy becomes collateral damage in a private war against memory. His tragedy is not that he fell, but that he endured without repair. When redemption finally comes, it is small, quiet, and terminal, because anything larger would be unbearable. Anakin does not overthrow the Emperor to reclaim agency, he acts to save his son, because love finally outweighs fear. The choice is not triumphant, it is relieving. He allows himself to feel the pain he has avoided and accepts death as consequence. Redemption hurts because it requires truth, and truth cannot coexist with the armor. This act does not undo harm or restore lost lives. It interrupts continuation. Anakin does not fix the galaxy, he stops making it worse. The saga insists that this is enough. Redemption is not erasure, but cessation. The cycle ends not with victory, but with release. Anakin chooses love once more and allows the monster to die with him. Seen this way, the true tragedy of Star Wars is not the fall of the Republic or the rise of the Empire, but the sustained suffering of a man who believed he had to keep hurting to justify his existence. Vader is terrifying because he is empty, not because he is angry. His power is impressive because it is compensatory. Every act of domination masks a wound that never closes. This is the cost of refusing to grieve. By understanding Anakin through shame rather than rage, the saga becomes more coherent and more devastating. It explains Vader's cruelty, his fixation on Luke, his obedience to Palpatine, and his inability to move forward. It clarifies why redemption is so rare and so painful. And it reveals that the true enemy is not darkness, but the refusal to face what was lost. Suffering unacknowledged becomes destiny reenacted. This closing movement insists that Star Wars is ultimately a story about emotional avoidance scaled to mythic proportions. The galaxy burns because one man could not forgive himself, and because institutions around him rewarded suppression over healing. Anakin never stopped suffering, and the Force never stopped amplifying that suffering. The tragedy endures because it is recognizable, and that recognition is what gives the saga its lasting power.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars, and my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.